Thank you. Welcome, everybody. This afternoon, I'm going to talk to you about some of the online resources through which you may search for your Australian ancestors. If you're a new starter, it's important to start with you and what you know about your immediate family, and then work backwards in time to discover the unknown. So you use life events like births, marriages, and deaths to grow your family tree. It's important to talk to other family members, check libraries, check Google, check any online family trees through Ancestry or Find My Past, and also check the Society of Australian Genealogy for a book or existing family tree. Now, you may take notes if you wish, but I am going to provide you with links to all of the sites that we're going to look at this afternoon. So today we're going to look specifically at the online resources of the convict era, the arrival of free settlers to the colony, through assisted immigration, through bounty immigration, and also the general growth of the population of the colony. So this is an example of the list of links that I'm going to provide to you. All of the sites that I'm going to suggest you use are free during the COVID-19 restrictions. So if you go to the Avpals website and you click on Student Course Notes where the arrow is, and you open the Student Course Notes A to M, search for genealogy and download the links list. It's important that you download it, because if you don't download it, you won't have live links. So we start off looking at transportation to the penal colony of New South Wales during the convict era. In January 1788, as you know, the first fleet arrived in Botany Bay, and through to the end of the convict transportation period, which was just on 80 years, there were over 164,000 convicts were transported to Australia. Now, there's a number of places that I'll suggest that you can look for convict records. Primary amongst these is the State Archives and Records, which is out at a place called Kingswood, but you can look at a lot of this stuff online. There are two types of records that you can look at online. There's the digitised indents, which we'll look at in more detail in a moment, and also the indents index. Now, in total, there's something like 12,000 digitised indents to search. So in the very early days, the convict records were minimal, just the names, any aliases they may have, the place where the trial took place, the trial date, and the term of the sentence that was meted out to these people. The very early convicts consisted of about 85% men and about 15% women. Almost 2/3 of the convicts were English, a small number of Scottish and Welsh, with the Irish making up the remaining 1/3. From 1814 to 1815, the convicts' age, their trade or calling, their place of birth were also recorded. So as time went on, we're getting more and more information about these people. In the 1820s, there was an enormous amount of additional information provided, particularly their criminal and social characteristics. So we got their complexion, their hair colour, eye colour, particular marks or scars, their height in feet and inches, the offence that was committed, any former convictions, their literacy, their religion, their marital status, and any children they may have. So we see, first of all, this is an online picture of the sort of information that we'll get from the index about John Archer. And there's a couple of interesting, that was a slip of the finger on the mouse wheel. There's a couple of interesting things that we see here. First of all, we see that the date of the trial was 1784. So John Archer was obviously held either in prison or on one of the prison hulks for something like 3 years. The other interesting thing is that he was originally destined to go to America, but as we know, America closed as a dumping ground for English convicts, and they got sent to Sydney instead. Now this is a picture of an actual indenture, a contract made between either the agent of the owner of the ship and the captain of the ship, who was responsible for the convicts on their way out. It's also interesting to note that George III was written in this as the sovereign of Britain, France and Ireland. Now, if you go on to one of the digitised records, and this one we're going back to John Archer, the screen, as you can see, is a little different. It's got a couple of facsimiles of the digitised record. If you click on the record where the arrow is and open it and then expand the record, this is what you would be looking at. So here you see the name of the convict, the place of trial, the date of trial, and the sentence. Now you also notice that there are two of these convicts who are crossed out. Now I don't know for why, but these convicts were scheduled to go on the ship, but for some unknown reason they were not on the ship. Now another site that you can look at is this one called Convict Records, and this is Convict Records only. It doesn't have anything else on it at all. You can search or browse through the records. Now we're going to browse for a female convict by the name of Elizabeth Barkworth. You can browse either through surname, year of transportation, or the ship name. But in most cases, it would be most likely that you'll know the surname of the person rather than the other two pieces of information. So when we search initially, the alphabet pops up and we're searching for B for Barkworth. So we click on the B and we get all of the convicts whose names start with B. There are 2,323 of them altogether under the letter B. So we scroll down to the list until we find Barkworth, and we see that there is only one convict with the name Barkworth. We click on that and we get Elizabeth Barkworth, which is who we're looking for. Now we get a little bit more information about Elizabeth Barkworth. She was one of 122 convicts transported on the Broxtonbury, which arrived in January 1814. You'll also notice there's a button there where the arrow is, which says contribute to this record. One of the wonderful things about this particular site is that people who are interested in this particular convict can contribute more information about them. And you'll see an example of that in a moment. So we go through the various screens giving us the details of Elizabeth Barkworth. We can see all of the information, date of birth, her occupation, date of death, how old, the crime she committed, where she was tried, and so on. I also see these are community contributions. You can see that on the 11th of May 2013, I wrote some information about Elizabeth Barkworth, and on the 31st of July and again on in 2019 and again on the 9th of November 2019, Beth Kibblewhite contributed some information to that particular record. So you can see that people who are interested in a particular convict can flesh out quite a lot of additional information about the particular person. So we move on to the first shipload of convicts which sailed from Ireland. They were in April 1791, and between then and 1853, there were approximately 26,500 Irish people were transported to New South Wales, many of them for trivial offences. And as a result of the Irish Rebellion in 1798, which the objective was for parliamentary reform and also to eliminate British rule in Ireland, there were a lot of Irish people sent out on the convict ships. Interestingly enough, many of the Irish were not recorded as convicts because they were treated as prisoners of war. Now, the last ship to carry convicts directly from Ireland was the Phoebe Dunbar, which arrived in Western Australia in 1853. But there was one other ship that came from England with 63 Irish Fenians. They were transported and arrived in Sydney in January 1868 aboard the Hougoumont, which was the very last convict ship to Australia. So convict records are also available at Ancestry Library and Find My Past. Now, during the COVID emergency, Ancestry Library has temporarily granted remote access to Ancestry Library Edition at Northern Beaches Library for card holders. Also, Find My Past library members can temporarily access records by writing to the Social Studies team and asking for access. Now, on the home page of the Northern Beaches Library, you click on Home, and that will open up more details of how you can access Ancestry. So that's a wonderful facility that the library has provided for people who are library card holders. Now, if you're not a member, you can join online, and I've provided the link in the links that are on the Avpals website for you to go directly to join up as a member. We move on now to free settlers. Initially, very few people wanted to make the arduous journey to the colony. However, grinding poverty and unemployment in Britain encouraged a lot of people to migrate, and as an added incentive, the government offered to pay for their passage. The first free settlers arrived on board a sailing ship, the Bellona, on the 16th of January 1793. A farmer from Dorset named Thomas Rose, his wife Jane, 3 sons and a daughter. And they were joined by Frederick Meredith, Thomas Webb and his wife and his nephew Joseph, and Edward Powell. These first free settlers were given a free passage, agricultural tools, 2 years' provisions and grants of land from the government. In addition, they were provided with convict labour free of charge. Thomas received 120 acres of land at a place that he named Liberty Plains, which is now in the suburbs of Strathfield and Homebush. We move on now to assisted immigrants. Beginning in 1828, the government organised a program to encourage people to migrate. Assisted immigrants had their passages paid as an incentive to settle in New South Wales. About 60,000 immigrants arrived under this particular program. Now, assisted immigrants, you can access the indexes through, again, the New South Wales State Archives and Records. And this is an image of typically what you'll find when you search for assisted immigrants. There's not a lot of information there, except their names, ages, the ship on which they came, and the year. But this is the type of information you can get if you have a look a little bit further into the name of the actual ship and the date that it arrived. You'll see towards the bottom, you'll see the Meadley family and their children, the gender of the children, the age of the children. You'll then move on to the other information about where they came from, what their occupation is or was, their religion, whether they could read and or write. So it gives you quite a bit of information there about the assisted immigrants. Moving on to bounty immigration. Now, bounty immigration ran from 1835 to 1841. Bounty immigrants were from Ireland, England, Wales, Scotland, and a number of other European countries. They were selected by colonists who paid for their passage, and on their arrival, the importer, as they were called, would employ the immigrant. The employer would be reimbursed, in many cases by the government, for all or part of the cost of passage. Now, how this worked was that the colonists would have an agent in England who would visit the various areas. Quite often, the agents would find people who were related to each other or knew each other. Sometimes they were contacted through the various parishes in England, and they were identified for their farming skills, and they would then go through this program to come out to the colony. Now, again, we can look up the indexes, and that's an image of an index for William Brown and his family who came out to the colony. And you can, again, view a card index for William, and also the details of the ship on which they came. So this information gives you the name of the ship, the arrival date, the name and age of the various immigrants, their trade or their relationship to the head of family, their religion, whether they could read and or write, where they were from, the name of the importer or the person who sponsored them to come out, and the bounty that was paid for the head of the family and also for the family. Sometimes these included keep or rations, and sometimes not. A number of other indexes that you can access through the New South Wales indexes are the Crew and Passenger Index, 1828-1841, Miscellaneous Immigrants, and Unassisted Immigrants. Now, it was fairly often that if the immigrants did not have enough money to pay for a cabin and they came out as steerage, they were seldom recorded. So we move on now to the other people that came out to the colony, and we can find a lot of them through the New South Wales birth, death and marriage record. Now the records, there's more than 20 million life events recorded through this facility. There's early church records which started in actually before 1788, but they're mostly recorded through 1788 through 1855, and those records show baptisms, marriages and burials. And then from 1856, the registry records births, and we can access them to anything more than 100 years ago. For marriages, anything more than 50 years ago, and deaths, anything more than 30 years ago. Now, this later on, as you'll see down the bottom of the screen, became a state responsibility. In Victoria, they started in 1836, Tasmania 1838, Western Australia started in 1841, South Australia 1842, Queensland 1853, and Northern Territory was recorded from 1856, but they were within the New South Wales registry. Now, in each state and territory, the registries work on a slightly different basis. Some of them, like New South Wales, you're free to search the index of any of these records. In some other states, you have to pay for a view. In some states, you can find the record you want. You can pay immediately and have that record delivered to your inbox by email. Now, in some of the very early records, the ones from 1788 to 1855, you'll find that the place at which the event happened is not recorded other than a 2-alphabet code, which are called the early church codes. If you look around amongst the other records within the New South Wales Birth, Deaths and Marriage Registry, you'll find a solution to that where all of the 2 alphabetical indexes are named, so that you can find out what church or district the event happened in. So these are the very first recorded birth, which was aboard the Lady Penrhyn, part of the first fleet, in April 1787. The first burial was on board the Alexander, 3rd of February 1787, and the first marriage was between William Parr and Mary McCormick on the corner of Bligh and Hunter Streets in Sydney in 1788. Now, I've included a link to this particular site where you can find the various dates on which or during which the births, marriages and deaths indexes are available in the various states and territories. Now, the next records we'll have a look at are census and musters in New South Wales. And musters first started in 1800, but free people didn't have to attend. So in 1828, the first census was held, undertaken to capture all of the people in New South Wales, and also it was a snapshot of where the colony was at that particular time. In 1828, the census covered some 36,500 inhabitants, both convict and free, and it captures the social and economic picture of the colony after 14 years. It covers all settlements within the colony, including Moreton Bay, which we now know is in Queensland, and Norfolk Island. There's about 25% of these returns survive, and they're available through Find My Past and Ancestry and Family Search. And I've given you the links to all of those sites. Now, this is an image of an 1828 census, and this happens to be the household of my 3 times great-grandfather, who was a convict. It's very interesting for a couple of reasons. The census form was supposed to have been filled in by the head of house, who signed it, and that signature was then witnessed by the census collector. But interestingly enough, if you have a look at the way the surname of Thomas and his 3 daughters is spelt, the spelling on the form that's been filled in is H-A-Y-N-E-S, where Thomas is signed down the bottom as H-A-I-N-E-S. So fairly clearly, Thomas didn't fill this form in himself. Census in Australia is interesting and very different from a lot of other countries, where no information about individuals survives from the censuses from 1901 to 2016. It's government policy to destroy all of the forms after statistical analysis was completed. We do have electoral rolls, however, but they have a weakness that they only record people over 21 years of age. So they contain names, address, occupation, and gender of each voter. They are of greater value to family historians, however, and they record the particular year or years and identify other adult family members living at the same address. Records are available through Ancestry, through Northern Beaches Library. The New South Wales electoral roll through 1842 to 1864. Again, the information is available through Ancestry at Northern Beaches Library. Interesting that men were granted the voting rights in 1850 and women started quite some time. I think it was about, yes, it was 50 years after that. Now, there are a lot of other places where you can get information that I'm not going to detail in any particular any particular detail today, and possibly we could run a future session on these places if there's enough interest. There's Trove newspapers. They're very interesting because you can delve into a lot of little regional newspapers and read all sorts of things that your ancestors got up to, what sort of sport they played, when there was a marriage in the family. There's all sorts of information there about what sort of frocks the women wore and all sorts of stuff. Wills and probate, land titles office, insolvency records, Google Maps, Google Images, and Google Advanced Search can be used to search for ancestors, and lots of information about them. Most of this sort of thing falls more into the information generally known as family history rather than genealogy, but nonetheless it fleshes out all of the information that we like to find out about our ancestors. Any records pre-First Fleet, going back to United Kingdom, and they have to be found through the parish registers. They were instigated by Cromwell in 1538. I've also included 2 sites where you can search for free reg, and also UK VMD. Now, if you click on where the arrow is on county, it will come up with a list of all of the parishes within the county which may have records that you can access. In general, the information that's online is available through Cindy's list, and I've included that in the links as well. There are 337 genealogy sites that you can find in more than 200 categories under Cindy's list, so it's a treasure trove of information. I'd also suggest that you join a family history society. Now, once you've found out where your family may have settled, and you'll find this through the birth registry of their children, you can find out if there's a family history society in that particular town or that particular region. And by joining that, you can get a lot of information. In most cases, these places have got volunteers who'll point you in the right direction of local information that they hold. If you can't find any particular history society through the Australasian Federation of Family History Organisations, I'd suggest that you Google and put in the name of the town and Family History Society and see if you can find anything. So that concludes my presentation. I'd like to take questions if I may.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Lee. I'm just going to unmute everybody, and if you stick your hand up when you want to speak, we'll poll you, but we'll leave you unmuted and see how that works. So hopefully you should all be unmuting. A couple of people, it's not automatically done. You might have to unmute yourself, but we're ready to go. Over to Lee for questions. Thank you. I've lost you, Lee. I can't hear what you. Sue has a question.
Lee, you mentioned that the census has been destroyed up until 2016, the records, which seems quite catastrophic and rather ironic in view of how much information the government has about us. Are there plans to continue to destroy the censuses, or have they stopped from 2016 destroying them once they've finished the data?
Thanks for the question, Sue. It is government policy that census records will be destroyed once they've extracted what information they want, which is not all that helpful at all. You know, you can only get information, say, through this region. So Northern Beaches, you'll find all sorts of information about how many people own their house and so on, but nothing really that is any use for genealogists, which is quite different from the experience we have with the British census. But no, that is policy, and that won't ever change. In fact, there's been some chatter over recent years that the government may stop undertaking census as we know it and switch to social media to collect the sort of information they're looking for.
Thanks.
Annette, you've got your hand up. Fire away.
Lee, I've had minor goes at finding people who arrived in Tasmania about 1847, but I found it all a bit obscure. Where would you suggest to start for Tasmanian records?
Well, a lot of those records will still be held through the New South Wales records because Tasmania was part of New South Wales when the colony was first set up. There may be some other records. I'll do a bit of research and try and get back to you on that if there are any other particular records. But a lot of the Van Diemen's Land records were included in the records of New South Wales records and archives hold. So I'd be looking at those sites that I've given you through the Avpals website to see if you can find what you're looking for there.
I was entertained to find that one of my these people came out as free settlers, so they chose to come, and all I could find was that the woman was described as tall with a big nose.
Oh dear. Well, if they did come out as free settlers, you may have difficulty finding them. As I said in the presentation, if people didn't have enough money to purchase a cabin and they came out as steerage, quite often they were not in the records at all, which is very sad.
Okay,
But
thank you.
you know, you could start having a look through various birth, death, and marriage records and get back to the earliest ones you can find, and that will give you some idea of the rough era in which they came out to Van Diemen's Land.
Thank you.
John, you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Jim. Lee, I have a relative whose great-great-grandmother came to Australia on board a ship called the Hereford. How do we find out more detail about that person?
Free settler?
Yes.
Okay. Again, difficult if she didn't come out as a cabin passenger. I think, you know, you probably have to look through one of those shipping lists at the New South Wales records to see if there's anything in there that may be recorded. It's unfortunate that people that came as free settlers are nowhere near as well documented as the convicts and people who came out under one of the assistance programs. It may be, as I said, that if they weren't wealthy and they didn't come out in a cabin, they came out as steerage, you may never find any record of them at all.
Thank you.
More questions?
Yes, sir.
I've got another question. I came out with my family in 1961. Now, in 100 years' time, that could be of interest to someone. So are those sort of records continuing in the more recent past?
Yes, as far as I know, the records are ongoing. Just who will have access to them, I don't know. I would imagine that in more recent times, the Commonwealth government, immigration may take over the administration of those records. But it would be my belief that those records will continue to be available.
Thank you.
Okay. David, you sent a chat message, which I got. You want to share it with Lee, who would probably be interested?
Yeah, I was just interested to see that one of the documents showed the name of James Brown. My grandfather was Ross Brown and he named his child James Brown. So I was just wondering, going back a bit before my grandfather's time, there may have been some connection to that particular document. I was quite surprised to see those names there.
Yes, you'll be surprised what you find when you look. That was one of the an immigrant after included in one of those particular programs. So I doubt that it would be. Oh, it could be related, of course. They could be related through some other ancestors. I don't know.
Yeah.
But what era did your ancestor come out?
Well, I'm a 5th generation Australian. My grandfather's he would have been about 120 now, so I don't know about the previous family to that. I don't know when his ancestors came to Australia.
No, it'd be worth having a search around through Ancestry to find my past, and also through the New South Wales Registry to see if you can find anything. Amazing what you can find.
Thanks, man.
Okay.
John, I can see you waving your hand again.
Thank you, Jim. Talking about the name Brown, my wife had a relative, a distant relative called Fox, who jumped ship in the Northern Territory, and he changed his name to Brown.
Good move, make him very hard to find.
Right.
Was that a comment, or do you have a question?
No, sorry, that was just a comment.
Oh, okay. Yes, if you were going to change your name, Brown, Smith, or Jones is the way to go.
Okay. Well, I think it's about time for us to wind up for the afternoon or for this session. Time for me to thank Lee for what was a very interesting talk. See a few claps there on screen, which is good to see. I hope you're going to join us for future sessions. Next week, we have a session from Saskia again as part of her series of Getting Smarter. So if you haven't enrolled for that, please feel free to follow the enrollment links, and we look forward to seeing you at another time. So thank you all for coming, and thank you, Lee, for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.